Welcome back to This Week in Football presented by Geico. You know, both head coaches in Super Bowl 48 have roots to the New York area. We'll get to Broncos head coach John Fox in a moment. But for Seahawks Lieutenant Pete Carroll, he spent half a decade with the Jets, 4 years as a defensive coordinator, and then one failed season as head coach in which the Jets went 6-10 in 1994. Then a few years at the helm of the Patriots, great run in USC, was a national champion, and now has had quite a bit of success with the Seahawks. Gary Myers, you've covered New York football for a very long time.
Yes,
you
I
won't
have.
mention the total number of years, but it's a while. So I'm wondering, when Pete Carroll was with the Jets, first things first, as a defensive coordinator, what was the perception of him as a coach?
A very player-friendly coach. The guys really liked him. They played very hard for him, and they had some success. Now, when he became the head coach in 1994, it's difficult to coach one unit of a team and then you get promoted and you get head coach of the entire team. So I think one of the problems that he had was, making that separation from the players, where now, he was the boss of, the entire team, and couldn't have that kind of close relationship, or it wasn't good to have that kind of close relationship with one side of the ball.
Was it thought that he could be a good head coach, because he has the 1 year with the Jets where he started good, actually,
right,
but finished so poorly? Then he's fired. He goes to New England and doesn't find much success in New England.
Well, as far as his 1 year with the Jets, he was 6-5, and they were playing a crucial late-season game against the Dolphins. And people remember this now as, the Dan Marino fake spike game. Well, if the Jets had won that game, they would have been 7-5, and they would have been in a really good position to make the playoffs. But that loss to Miami was the first loss in a 5-game losing streak to end the season. So they finished 6-10, and then Leon Hess fired him because Rich Kotite had gotten fired by the Eagles, and Kotite and Hess had a close relationship when Kotite was an assistant coach with the Jets. That turned out to be, a bad decision by Hess. And he goes to New England, Pete does, after a stopover in San Francisco as a defensive coordinator, and he has to succeed Bill Parcells, which is a difficult job, as has been proven every time Parcells left. The coach who succeeded him, had a difficult time. And each year the Patriots won fewer games than they had the year before in Pete's 3 seasons with New England.
I mean, no doubt a tough act to follow, right, for sure. But what were the thoughts and the reasons that were given, at the time at least, as to why Pete Carroll had failed as a head coach in the NFL, his first stint?
Well, with the Jets, I think the reason he got fired was because Kotite was available. I don't think if Kotite hadn't gotten fired that Hess would have necessarily fired Pete after 1 year. It was very unusual, and I think very unfair to fire a coach after one season.
And how about with the Patriots? What was the thought about Pete Carroll at that time and why he couldn't work as an NFL head coach?
Well, just a lack of success there, I think. He took over a team that was really loaded. They had just come off a Super Bowl appearance, losing to Green Bay when then Parcells left to go to the Jets. And they had a ton of talent on that team. And he made the playoffs in his first year there. But, like I mentioned, his second year he won fewer games in his first year. And his third year he won fewer games in his second year. And Robert Kraft really wanted to hire Bill Belichick when Parcells had left to go to the Jets. Belichick had spent 1 year, Parcells last year, in New England as an assistant coach. And he and Kraft developed a very strong relationship. But at that point, because of the animosity that existed when Parcells left to go to the Jets, Kraft figured, I can't hire a guy who was so close to Parcells. I need to make a clean break. And then the 3 years went by with Carroll, and they didn't have the success that Kraft anticipated, and then he went and hired Belichick.
Pete Carroll has a ton of success in college then. We all know how wonderful his run at USC was. And so he then gets labeled as the guy who can do it in college but can't do it in the pros. Except for this time around, he is doing it in the pros. So what's changed for Pete Carroll?
Well, you were asking before what's one of the reasons that, people felt he couldn't be a successful head coach. Pete was a real fun-loving guy, and he still is. He's very enthusiastic. He doesn't look like the second oldest coach in the league, right?
No.
Because of his gray hair. He looks like he'd be 40
Which looks good on you, by the way.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
But, one of the first things he did with the Jets was he built a basketball court at Hofstra so the coaches and the players can play. He had to take the team out for movies and bowling, which in those days was unheard of, and a lot of coaches do that now. What changed at USC is a lot of people thought he was a college coach, that he can relate better to 18 to 22-year-olds than he would to a guy who's been in the league for 10 years. And he was extremely successful at USC, winning the national championship, and his teams were always very competitive. When he got his third shot with the Seahawks, it wasn't the first time he had been offered an opportunity to go back to the NFL, but he felt the time was right. And, I think he learned a lot by being at USC. And I think he's an excellent NFL head coach. To me, he's not I wouldn't put him in the upper tier as far as maybe game management decisions and not going for the field goal the other day. Really could have come back and hurt Seattle, but the players really do like him. And that hasn't changed, and they do play very hard for him.
Meanwhile, the other head coach in the Super Bowl, Broncos head coach John Fox, is somebody we know well in this area, was an outstanding defensive coordinator with the Giants, then had a very successful run with the Panthers, got to a Super Bowl, lost to New England, and here with the Broncos has made the playoffs in each season. He's just the sixth coach in NFL history to lead two different teams to the Super Bowl. Gary, even I can remember that when he was the defensive coordinator for the Giants, we all sort of knew it was just a matter of time before he would get that chance as a head coach.
Well, I can tell you this, Ryan. Before the 2000 season, the Giants gave Jim Fossil just a one-year contract extension. And the Giants got on a late run this year. If you remember, Jim Fossil pushed all his chips to the middle of the table.
This team is going to the playoffs.
Right, and they not only did that, they went to the Super Bowl. If the Giants didn't make the playoffs that year in 2000, Jim Fossil was going to be fired and replaced by John Fox. The Giants loved John Fox. They were ready to promote him. And the fact that the Giants got to the Super Bowl that year, they lost to the Ravens. Fossil got a long-term extension. Fox interviewed after that season for the Buffalo job and didn't get it. And then following the 2001 season, he was hired by the Panthers. And as you mentioned, had a very successful run there. You know, took them to the Super Bowl where they lost to New England, and it ended up bad there for him. Jerry Richardson made him coach out the final year of his contract, which is very unusual. He didn't give an extension and didn't fire him with 1 year to go, and they finished 2-14, and then he got fired. Now, it worked out well for Carolina going 2-14 because they wound up with the first pick in the draft, and they took Cam Newton, and he's obviously turned around that franchise. Fox was hired right away by John Elway in Denver. Interestingly, Elway had contacted Ernie Corsi, the former Giants general manager, who really liked John Fox, and he was a consultant to Elway during the coaching search, so it's no surprise to me that Elway then turned to John Fox.
You know, we all in this area have some affinity for him because of his years with the Giants, and obviously when we saw him go through his health scare earlier, nobody wants to see that, and so it's just good seeing him back on the field. But as far as he goes as a coach, it feels like he's still underrated as a head coach in this league, doesn't it, Gary?
Well, it does. Now, I don't think that necessarily was the case in Carolina because he took a team that, to a Super Bowl, and he didn't really have like a dominant personality on that team like Peyton Manning does with Denver. Now, I will definitely agree with you. He hasn't gotten the credit in Denver that you necessarily would think that he would. Maybe that will change in the next 2 weeks, but part of that is because this is considered Peyton Manning's team. He's the face of the franchise, not John Fox. But he's an excellent coach. He's another coach that players really do like. And they play hard for him. And that's like half the battle in the NFL. If your players will play hard for you all the time, you tend to be successful.
Well, you know what? Sort of fitting, right? John Fox versus Pete Carroll in a Super Bowl in the metropolitan area, both with New York roots.